Thank you, Your Excellency, for that bold and inspiring vision. Really stirring. Many congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
I would like now to welcome questions from the audience. You'll notice that there are microphones that we have put up on the two walkways here. So if you have a question, if you could come up to the microphone. Please, as a courtesy to the recording and to His Excellency, identify yourself quickly and then state your question succinctly. I know who you are, but please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Professor. Let me take this opportunity to say Goyi Mori, Mr. Deputy President. My name is Macron Bandoy Lipe. I'm from the Philippines, and I'm working at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and I am the head of African programs for capacity building, for governance, public policy training, and for the past 3 years that I've been in the school, I have been closely working with a number of African institutions, donor organizations that have been inspired to take up the kind of leadership that not just Singapore has been doing, but of the entire Asian region. And my understanding of Africa for the past 3 years that I have been working is that Africa in general has been very serious to elevate its status from mostly lower, I would say, economies to now becoming more middle income, to become a middle income country. One good example of the work that we have been doing right now is with Ethiopia. I was just in Ethiopia for the past few quarters of this year, and we have been training a number of minister level officials there on good governance, economic development, public-private partnerships, and in fact, next month they will be coming here to Singapore to receive a training from the RKY school. So much for the publicity of what we've been doing. But my understanding of Africa is that, in my observation, it's still kind of a fragmented continent. South Africa celebrates its bastion of democracy. For 21 years, you have been enjoying a very democratic society. But there's still a lot of countries in Africa right now that are still undergoing some challenges because maybe of some authoritarian regimes. In these 10 years that you have been setting for South Africa to become a model nation for Africa, what do you think these countries, neighboring countries, can learn from the democratic principles that you are embodying? And what, I would say, insights that you can share with them so that they can also enjoy, I would say, the level of freedom and certainty that you are experiencing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Macron. Excellent question. Your Excellency.
Should I answer now? Okay.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And if one takes into account that the continent of Africa was thoroughly colonized by maybe two countries, Liberia and Ethiopia, the entire continent was plagued with colonization, and colonialists had a free play in every country other than those two. You then have to use that as a backdrop to realize the challenges that Africa has had to face in becoming more modern, more democratic, and a number of countries in Africa became independent around the 60s, as I think a number of Asian countries also became independent. And beyond that, the last country to be completely free was then South Africa. There's one or two that still needs to achieve that. And during that period, a lot has happened and developed. And in recent times, you'll find that many, many countries on the African continent have actually embraced democracy. They've embraced not only democracy, but also development. By and large, you'll find that only a few countries are still plagued with instability. Many more countries have become more stable, democratic than those that are still plagued by instability. And even those that are currently, tottering on the instability side have embraced democracy and what they are going through are the sort of birth pangs and the growing pangs of becoming democratic. And you look at those that are still in the throes of such difficulties, they already have constitutions and they are getting to grips with becoming more inclusive. And I'd like to believe that, the African Union, which combines all the 54 countries on the African continent, just that union alone is playing a critical role in spreading the message of democracy, modernity, development, and has gone beyond just dealing with politics, but is also dealing with issues of development, economic development, social development, in terms of, taking the whole continent to look to 2063 and coming up with goals that more or less coincide with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that in itself are instruments, vehicles that are lifting the continent towards becoming more and more democratic. So this flood that is rising and rising is lifting more and more countries. And I think I complain less now about more countries being undemocratic. My complaint now is more about meeting the 2063 development goals and basically saying on a measure, on various measurements, on indices, are we as African countries moving towards meeting those goals, the UN goals and also the African goals? So I would be more relaxed and I would be more patient and I would give more leeway to some of those countries. And clearly, they are also under pressure. They're under pressure from regional bodies. It no longer happens on the African continent that you can get away with a coup. If you instigate a coup, the whole continent, the leaders and the people of Africa are going to descend on you like a ton of bricks. So which means that it's now become accepted that coups are not the done thing. And autocracy is not the done thing. So you almost become a pariah on the African continent to a point where your country is excluded and expelled from the African Union institutions. So it is getting better. And if you were to represent it as a glass, it is 3/4 full rather than being 1/4 full. So we've made tremendous progress. I know I'm an eternal optimist, but this optimism is based on something that's real, that you can touch and feel and see. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sir, yes, if you could use the microphone over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Kasi Raja, academic, a one-time very active academic in the University of Singapore University, later on in the National University of Singapore, and followed by the head of the Division of Legal Studies and Taxation at NTU. Now, on account of certain physical challenges, I have taken a back seat from academia, but I'm still interested in a very informed approach to the whole subject. And on this matter, in this context, sir, my attraction to Africa, and particularly South Africa, was based on two factors. The legal system of South Africa attracted me as a lawyer. It had a very sort of eclectic approach to the law, a combination of the Roman Dutch civil law with all the principles of justice and fair play in a much better way than the English common law. For the benefit of those lawyers here, if any, I will be glad to talk to them during the break. But moving on from there, I drew much enlightenment from the decisions of the highest judicial tribunals there, and I still make use of it in my approach in a very eclectic way to the subject. My second attraction was based on the way in which one from South Asia, India, made an impact in Australia. I'm talking of the late Mahatma Gandhi. I believe that he cut his teeth on equality and fair play in South Africa. Well, on those two bases, I also make the other point. I got attracted to Singapore from the land of my birth, then called Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. And I was very touched by the way in which you drew the comparison of Singapore and South Africa in the ways in which Singapore could be of help to your country. And that is what I do believe, because it was the leadership of Singapore that attracted me to Singapore. The late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his team, who preached and put into practice all the principles of religious and cultural harmony, fair play.
I'm sorry, is there a question you're building up to?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
So what I really want to know is in what way we can, particularly with regard to expertise, contribute.
Thank you for that. How can we contribute? What specifically would you like us?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for the lead up to your question. But let me just comment a little bit on that. I'm also legally trained, and my legal training started off with having to learn Latin, which I failed miserably over a number of years. But it also then moved on to learning Roman law, Dutch law, and English law, and South African law, and also what they used to call South African customary law. So 5 laws that I had to learn in my legal training. And this enriched my knowledge of the law quite deeply. So much as it may sound a bit schizophrenic, the way that law used to be taught in our country, it actually enriched our legal knowledge quite extensively, because in learning our law we would dig into the old Roman laws and the old Dutch laws, and that, in my view, was very, very good indeed. In terms of what is it of an expertise type that we can learn from Singapore, there's a lot that we can learn. Right? It spans from, at the social level. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to go to your housing board, and we were deeply impressed with how your country is seeking to achieve social cohesion in terms of the distribution of the various people who make up your population from a demographic point of view into housing units. Now, we were, South Africa, the rock bed of racism. We were the racism capital of the world. And we haven't quite yet achieved the level of success that we got to hear about here, where in your housing units it is predetermined on a quota basis how the architecture of demographic occupation will be in your housing units. South Africa is a country where the social engineering was so perverse and so bad that they delineated a number of areas in our country, in towns indeed, as towns for this race group, towns for this language group, for this tribe, and what have you, and that's perfected the divisions that we are still, having to deal with today. And what the ANC has sought to do is to unite the people of South Africa and to engender social cohesion and to enhance nation building. But Singapore has, in my view, perfected this. And we found this to be quite admirable. And it's something that we will be learning. There are a number of people, obviously, who are averse to quotas and what have you, but a mixture of free choice and quota system to enhance social cohesion and nation building would seem to me to be something that is working here to good effect, and it's something that we certainly have learned from. Your economic management, and particularly your management of your state-owned enterprises, is something that we're going to be learning from, and just the level of efficiency that has been achieved in the management of institutions and processes here. It's certainly something that we're going to be learning from. And we've said that we would like to send a number of people to your state-owned enterprises, particularly Temasek, to come and see exactly how they do it, how they manage their corporations. Being a new democracy, we're still having to grapple with a number of challenges that we encounter as we manage big corporations like our energy generation corporation, which is building the third largest power utility, power station in the world. And as we move possibly towards a nuclear energy again, as we build some of the largest dams in the world, we do need to exchange views with a number of other people. The mining industry in our country used to be the leading mining industry in the world, and we still have huge mineral resources in our country, and these we can exploit further again going into the future on a new basis, on a transformed basis, with partners from this part of the world, with partners who now fully understand that there needs to be shared value, that you need to share progress, you need to share resources, you need to share everything that is good that you are doing. Previously, those who were in charge of the various resources in our country only extracted those resources for the leading metropolis in the world, in Europe and in the United States, and left very, very little for our people. So that's something that we can learn, because here in this basin, you have learned and you have perfected the idea of having shared value, of making sure that prosperity needs to be shared all round. So that, if it's not expertise, it is actually something that we can learn by osmosis and by sharing more broadly with many other people around the world.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On the grassroots level, we are having a very active grassroots. On that, it can also help. I can talk to you more about that. The second point is this. Singapore is a general question. Singapore is a very small country. In what respect is what is good for Singapore as a small country could be duplicated in a vast country with much greater resources as South Africa and Africa.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me do a quick introduction. My name is Harsh Rajan. I run a company called Hey Math, which essentially is based on the Singaporean education system. We've understood how maths is taught in Singapore, and Singapore obviously does extremely well globally, and have effectively converted that into a program which can actually be used in other developing countries. We do a little bit of work in South Africa, sir, in the provinces of the Northern Cape, the Free State, and the Western Cape at this point in time. My question to you, however, is actually just has two small parts to it. The first is the use of technology as a tool to actually improve education systemically in South Africa, particularly in the areas of maths and science, and what your views might be on that. The second aspect, which is related slightly broader to the education system, is touches on the role of unions in South Africa. Again, very focused on the education system, and I'd be grateful for your comments on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I may, just one question before I turn over to His Excellency. I'm going to take on this side and I'll come back to you. Sir, in the blue shirt.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ian Hall. I'm a South African working in Singapore. Mr. Deputy President, thank you for coming to Singapore. Welcome to Singapore. Just as an aside, we're having a braai tomorrow. If you want to come, you're welcome. I think you've painted a really rosy picture of Africa, and indeed, I'm also like you. I'm an optimist. I think that Africa is a rising continent. The youth demographic is something that we need to capture. There are a lot of positives that you've very well outlined. However, I think the biggest issue that worries observers of South Africa into the next 10 years is this gap between policy and delivery. You were introduced as being the architect of the NDP, a process in which I actually participated, and I've seen very little progress on the NDP. We've seen education probably being, really challenged. We've seen policy uncertainty in the mining industry, an industry which you know well, Mr. Deputy President, where we see that the amendment to the MPRDA, which has been touted for so many years, still hasn't been implemented. As we stand today, all of our universities are closed because of simply a failure in law and order. We have an issue with the renewable energy program, where the person who has been deployed to the state utility has now refused to connect them. So that has paralyzed the renewable energy sector. We see state capture, which is the catchword in South Africa. We see all of these things. So for us, the real issue is, how do we overcome these issues, and how do we get the ANC working again? And if the ANC can't do it, then obviously the local elections recently has shown that some real opposition is good for everybody, including the ANC. So how are we going to overcome these issues? And I think nothing has symbolized the rot more than the news that broke on Sunday that the ambassador of Singapore has a checkered past. And is the South African government going to do something about that as well? Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
Okay, thank you. Your Excellency, may I turn over to you at this point?
One more.
Take one more question?
Yeah.
All right, sir.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, from South Africa, Vice President Ramaphosa, and Mr. Quah, Professor Quah. My name is Ron Tan, we're in field efficiency. Basically, I would like to know, what is your strength of your rand versus the US dollar and Chinese yuan? Because in recent months, many African currency has been devalued. The other question is, when you plan your development program for South Africa for the next 10 years, that was before COP21, Conference of Party on Climate Change. Today, COP21 will be ratified soon, and all the countries, including South Africa, is a signatory to the convention to reduce emission and cap any global height of temperature to 2 degrees centigrade or be below. How are you going to implement your development plan before COP21? You have already planned. Are you going to rectify and make major rectification to your plan to comply with COP21 as South Africa is a signatory? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sir, may I turn over to you now?
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowan. Let me start with you. Your questions are quite sharp and pointed and straightforward. Are we going to ratify COP21? The answer is yes. We are going to, and we're going to implement. And we were in the forefront of having the agreement sealed. Minister of Environmental Affairs, and our Deputy Minister of Environmental Affairs played a key role in ensuring that they bring all the parties together from the United States, from China and all that around the table to seal that agreement, which is now currently being ratified by a number of countries, and South Africa is also going to ratify it, and we will implement it. We'll be in the forefront. The strength of the Rand. The Rand, as you might know, is one of the most traded currencies in the world. Since we opened ourselves up to be a player in the world, our economy that is, and open our economy, the Rand is traded more than many other currencies, even more than the peso, I would think, in terms of developing economies, currencies. And it has been strengthening, surprisingly, strengthening quite interestingly against the dollar in the past few weeks. It gyrates. Because it's so heavily traded, it keeps on gyrating. And some people characterize the Rand as being volatile. But in the past few weeks, it has regained a strength that is quite interesting, quite surprising, and quite appreciated by a number of players in the economy, particularly those who have invested quite heavily in South Africa. And we say, long may it last. But as you know, the strength and the weakness of the Rand is a double-edged sword. For exporters who export various commodities and other products out of South Africa, when the Rand weakens, that is a great boon to them because they are able to bring more money to the country. And for those who have invested in the country, it's not so great. And so when it strengthens, that's when they feel that their return on a dollar basis is a lot better. So sometimes you've got to take it like the wave, the ups and downs, but clearly we want a stronger Rand because that strengthens our economy all around. Coming back to the question that Mr. Rogan asked in relation to technology and the use thereof in maths and science, I couldn't agree more with you that any clever, smart, intelligent country would want to utilize technology, particularly in education. And Africa has taken well to technology. I remember a gentleman a Dutch businessman, who once said to me, you know, you Africans, you must forget about technology. You must just concentrate on your animals. Just focus on your animals, improve your game parks, and just focus on them because, and he said, because, and he was a businessman who did business in South Africa and a number of countries, and Indonesia and a number of Asian countries. And he says, because the Asian countries have left you behind. They are into semiconductors, they are into computers, they are into cell phones, they are into microchips, and they are way ahead of you. So in order to show up your economies, just concentrate on your animals, your lions, your elephants, and hippos, and all that. Forget all these other things. And he was a good friend, and he died a few years ago, and I would have wanted to bring him out and say, look at Africa now. The technological revolution that is taking place in Africa is second to none. People have taken to technology like it's getting out of business. And utilizing technology for banking, do you know that the SMS process was originated in Africa? Yeah. The prepaid system was originated in Africa. Africa gave birth to all those systems, and therefore, I mean, the internet or mobile phone banking has gained a lot of traction in Africa. So Africa has taken very well to technology. I was talking to a friend earlier today about how technology is also being utilized and can be utilized exponentially in the healthcare center, where you can use technology and mobile technology to diagnose somebody with a disease. It could be the Zika virus, it could be malaria, it could be HIV/AIDS, and immediately get results. And that is what Africa is going to start leading in as well. So what you see happening in other environments with regard to technology is something that can be taken up very, very quickly, and it is being taken up very quickly in Africa. And education can also and should also be driven, particularly maths and science, through technology. I get very excited when it comes to technology, because each time I come to any of these countries here, I say, the first stop I want to have is a technology shop. So yesterday, a professor, I had to go with all these bodyguards who follow me to a technology shop to go and buy some computer stuff and all that. And I'm African, so I love technology. So we love technology in Africa. So we're taking to it very, very nicely. In relation to unions, unions have started focusing on education. A number of unions now have their own colleges. The union that I originated from, the National Union of Mine Workers, has its own college, and up to date here of it has educated more than 20,000 of its members' children in various fields, and a number of them in technology as well. So unions have taken to this extremely well. Mr. Ian Hall, you are a South African. You will have greater knowledge of the South African DNA. You will have greater knowledge of how our country is traversing this very tortuous and difficult route towards becoming a more democratic, a more stable, and a more developed nation. And clearly, the route from an apartheid state to where we want to go was always going to be a tortuous one. It was never going to be a straight route like you will get, you know, in Europe. We've come from a terrible past, and we do need the time, the patience, and also, I would say, yes, the patience to get to where we want to go. Now, all what is happening in our country are those shocks, those bumps for those who fly in the air. You do get those shocks and those bumps and cloudy weather, and when you go through clouds and you have these bumps, that's what it is. And is the plane going to fall? No. Are the wheels going to come off? No. Are we going to get over these clouds? Yes. Are we going to resolve all the issues that you've identified from the university turmoil that we're going through? Yes, because it will not last forever. The students want free, total free education. We have ensured that there is universal attendance of school, basic school, from grade 0 right through to 12 years of school. It's universal now. And 85% of that is free. And that was done from the resources of the state. Universities have now been opened. The Freedom Charter said, open up the doors of learning. And we've opened up the doors of learning. Black young people always found a glass ceiling, doors closed to universities. Today, they can enter any university. And in fact, we now have almost 1 million young black kids in universities and institutions of higher learning. And because they come from poor families, they want free education. Are we able to give free education now? No. We are, however, able to give free education to the poor. Those who are poor, we've committed that we are going to give free education. And that is the message that is beginning to sink to the many students that you're talking about where you are saying there is no law and order and all that. Yes, there is law and order. We're making sure that we preserve life, we preserve destruction to property, and young people are very agitated at the moment. They want free education, and we're sending them clear message to them that we will provide free education for the poor, but not to my children. My children who are still at university should not get free education because I can afford to pay. And a number of parents in South Africa can still afford to pay, save for the very poor. And those are the ones we want to cater for. So they want free education for all, including Cyril Ramaphosa's children, and we are saying we can't afford it. Cyril Ramaphosa's children must be able to pay because he can pay. So that message is sinking in, and we will be able to resolve that. You talk about the gap between policy and delivery. These are issues based on the NDP that are being addressed, and we're gaining traction. We're gaining more and more traction, and we are going to get on top of this. Yes, there have been weaknesses in relation to policy uncertainty. There have also been weaknesses in a number of areas. Issues of state capture are now being addressed by the public protector, and the public protector is paying close attention to what needs to be addressed in this regard. And she will come up with her findings, and out of that we will be able to find solutions for a whole number of ills that beset our country now. And we are a country that is going through problems that many countries have either gone through or will go through in the future. And these are the bumps of a flying plane, my friend. We will be able to stabilize this plane. It will fly well, it will land well. Will it fall from the sky? The answer is a big no. Because we are determined as South Africans to make sure that our democracy keeps on yielding the results that our people expect. And we've still got enough people in our country, people of goodwill, people who are very supportive, also understanding. And the best part, sir, because you're a businessman who's invited me to this braai, which I wish I could come to so that we could talk more. The best part, yeah, there you are. The best part, let me tell you something. We've got a group of South Africans right now in New York. And who are they? They are from government, led by the Minister of Finance. They are from business, led by the leading icons of business. 28 CEOs are with the Minister of Finance and a number of other government colleagues, as well as unions. They are all trolling the streets of New York, Wall Street, you name it, wherever. They are there. From there they'll go to London, they'll go to Frankfurt and so forth. And I'd like them to come to Singapore as well, because Singapore is now going to invest heavily in South Africa, isn't it? So that's where they are. They are very much aware of all these challenges. And they are saying, we have confidence that our country is going to resolve all these problems. And yes, you are not mad by raising all these problems. You are a very patriotic South African, but at the same time, deeply embedded in what you are saying is the hope that we should resolve these problems. And I thank you for your hope, because we are going to resolve them. We have the will and the determination to resolve them. And what we need is that South African braai intention that you have to make sure that we resolve them all. So we will resolve them, sir.
Thank you.
Watch this space.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, sir, for picking up on all those questions, not least your very stirring response to Mr. Ian Hall's pointed questions. You know, earlier in your talk, you mentioned how you viewed democracy, transparency, the rule of law as shock absorbers, as things that allowed us to overcome the problems that we encounter along the way. And I think that is, nowhere illustrated better in the way in which you've just responded, the things that you will be doing on these problems that we've identified. And if I had anything to say about it, yes, certainly Singapore will be investing in South Africa, but I'm afraid I have nothing to offer. But I can say for certain, we have so much to learn from one another. So I want to thank you very much for being here this morning. We've reached the end of our time. I'm very sorry. I know that people are still waiting to ask questions. But we have to let His Excellency go. But before we do that, I want to thank you all for your attention and your enthusiasm and your energies and your questions. And I invite you to thank His Excellency for just an amazing morning. Thank you.